Hey there, history buffs and torture enthusiasts. Wait, that came out wrong. I'm Mr. Basil, and today we're diving into the darkest corners of human cruelty. You know, the stuff that makes modern-day timeout corners look like spa treatments. Now you've probably heard about medieval torture devices, right? Iron maidens, racks, the usual suspects. But what about the punishments so horrifying that historians literally tried to scrub them from the records? Yeah, those exist. And trust me, after number 7, you'll understand why some knowledge should have stayed buried. Before we start, quick question: how many of these do you think you can handle before tapping out? Keep count, because by the end, we'll see if you're tougher than a medieval peasant. Spoiler alert, you're probably not. Let's get into it. 1. The BOATS SCAPHISM. Picture this: ancient Persia around 500 BC. You've just been sentenced to death, but here's the twist: it's going to take about 2 weeks and you'll be awake for all of it. They'd trap you between 2 boats or hollowed-out tree trunks with only your head, hands, and feet sticking out. Sounds uncomfortable but survivable, right? Oh, you sweet summer child. They'd force-feed you milk and honey until you developed the most catastrophic diarrhea imaginable. Then they'd pour more honey all over your exposed body parts. Now, what loves honey and human waste more than anything? Insects, swarms of them. The Greek historian Plutarch described victims being devoured from within by the maggots that bred in their own filth. But here's what'll really make your skin crawl, and this is where it gets medieval. Some victims lasted over 2 weeks in this living nightmare. Imagine being so covered in your own waste and insect larvae that you literally can't see your own skin anymore. Why did this get erased? Well, even the Persians eventually realized that maybe, just maybe, this was a bit much. But the real question is, was this the worst one? Keep watching, because number 4 will make Scaphism look like a bubble bath. Do rat torture. Okay, so you're afraid of rats. Multiply that fear by about 1,000. This charming little method was popular in medieval Europe, particularly during the Dutch Revolt. Here's how it worked. They'd place a cage or bucket full of rats on your stomach. Normal day so far, right? Then they'd heat the other end of the container. Now, rats are smart creatures. When their home starts getting toasty, they panic. And when there's nowhere else to go, they do the only logical thing: they dig through you. A Dutch account from 1568 described prisoners' screams being heard across the entire city. But here's the part that got scrubbed from most history books. The torturers would sometimes keep the victim alive for days, repeating the process on different parts of the body. The worst part? This method was so effective at extracting confessions that it spread to South America during the colonial period. And get this, there are rumors it was used as recently as the 20th century in certain regimes. Can't confirm that, but I also can't sleep tonight, so there's that. Feeling queasy yet? Because we're just getting started, and number 8 involves something you probably have in your kitchen right now. 3. Lingchi, death by 1,000 cuts. China's imperial courts weren't messing around when it came to punishment. They called this one slow slicing, which is like calling a tsunami a bit of water. This execution method was reserved for the worst criminals, traitors, patricides, and people who really ticked off the emperor. The executioner would systematically remove pieces of the condemned person's body over hours or even days. We're talking fingers, toes, nose, ears, then larger chunks. But here's the twisted part that most history books gloss over. It was considered an art form. Skilled executioners would be praised for keeping the victim alive as long as possible. There were even guidelines between 10 and 3,000 cuts depending on the crime's severity. One documented case from 1905, yes, the 20th century, showed photographs of a victim who endured the process for an entire afternoon. The Chinese government banned it shortly after because, you know, photographs make atrocities a bit too real for comfort. Want to know the really disturbing part? The crowds that gathered to watch. This wasn't done in dungeons, it was public entertainment. Thousands would attend. Makes you wonder what those same people would have done with smartphones and social media. Still with me? Good, because the next one involves everyone's favorite biblical story gone horribly wrong. 4. Crucifixion, the untold details. Yeah, you know about crucifixion. Sunday school covered it, right? Wrong. What you learned was the PG version. The historical reality was so much worse that even religious texts downplayed it. See, the Romans didn't invent crucifixion, they perfected it. And by perfected, I mean they turned dying into a multi-day ordeal of calculated agony. First, they'd scourge you with a flagrum, a whip embedded with bone and metal that would literally rip chunks of flesh off your back. Some victims died from this alone, the lucky ones anyway. Then comes the cross. But here's what they don't tell you: you weren't nailed through your palms. That wouldn't support your weight. The nails went through your wrists, severing the median nerve and causing excruciating pain with every tiny movement. The real killer? Asphyxiation. You'd have to push up on the nail through your feet to breathe, which would shred your back against the rough wood, causing more agony. Eventually, your muscles would fail and you'd suffocate. Could take days. The Romans sometimes broke victims' legs to speed things up, not as mercy, but to make room for the next batch. During the Jewish revolts, they crucified so many people they ran out of wood. Why was this erased? Because admitting the true horror makes the civilized Roman Empire look like something out of a slasher film. But wait until you hear about number 11. The Romans actually borrowed that one from somewhere even more creative. 5. Hanged, drawn and quartered. Medieval England had one punishment that made all others look tame. Reserved for high treason, this was the ultimate "we want you to suffer" sentence. First, you'd be hanged, but not to death, just until you're almost dead. You know, for fun. Then, while you're still conscious, they'd cut you down and disembowel you. Yes, you'd watch your own intestines being pulled out. Then came the drawing part. Your organs would be burned in front of you. The smell of your own roasting liver? Yeah, that was intentional. Finally, they'd behead you and chop your body into 4 parts. The quartering. These pieces would be displayed in different parts of the kingdom as a warning. But here's the part that got erased. They'd sometimes keep your head alive for a few seconds after decapitation. Witnesses reported seeing eyes moving and mouths trying to speak. One executioner in 1305 allegedly held up William Wallace's severed head and watched him blink 3 times. This method was officially used until 1870, though the last full execution was in 1782. Why did it stop? Not because it was cruel, because public opinion finally caught up to how barbaric it looked. Took them long enough. Think that's the peak of human cruelty? Oh, my sweet, naive friend. Number 9 will prove you wrong. 6. The Brazen Bull. Ancient Greece gave us philosophy, democracy, and mathematics. Also this nightmare machine. Perillus of Athens built this hollow bronze bull as a torture device for Phalaris, the tyrant of Acragas. The victim would be locked inside and a fire would be lit beneath it. As the metal heated up, you'd literally be roasted alive. But wait, there's an acoustic twist. The bull was designed with tubes that would convert the victim's screams into sounds resembling a bull's bellowing. So outside, people would hear gentle moo sounds, while inside, someone was experiencing hell on earth. Temperatures inside could reach over 400 degrees Fahrenheit. You wouldn't die quickly. It would take 15 to 20 minutes of unimaginable agony. The bronze would sear your skin on contact, and you'd be breathing superheated air that would scorch your lungs from the inside. The ultimate irony? Phalaris tested it on Perillus himself, the inventor. Talk about a product demonstration going wrong. Why was this erased? Because it was too efficient. Several tyrants loved it so much they used it regularly, which made ancient Greece look less like a cradle of civilization and more like a cradle of sadism. But here's the question that'll keep you up tonight. What kind of mind designs a torture device with acoustic engineering? And more importantly, why did number 12 make this look humane? 7. Flaying. Alright, content warning. This is where we cross from historically disturbing into why am I still watching this territory. Flaying means skinning someone alive. And yes, it's exactly as horrific as it sounds. The Assyrians were particularly fond of this method, depicting it proudly in their palace carvings. They'd start with the face, because psychological torture is just as important as physical, apparently, and work their way down. A skilled torturer could keep you alive through most of the process. The shock would eventually kill you, but not before you'd experienced pain that our brains literally aren't equipped to process. Marco Polo documented flaying in his travels through Asia. One particularly disturbing account from 13th century Persia described officials being flayed and having their skins stuffed with straw as a warning to others. Imagine walking past City Hall and seeing your predecessor wearing himself like a costume. The Aztecs took it a step further. During certain religious ceremonies, priests would wear the flayed skins of sacrificial victims. For days, let that sink in. Why was this scrubbed from history? Because it's impossible to romanticize. You can't paint a heroic picture of a civilization that turned human beings into decorative leather. Historians tried, though. Oh, how they tried. Remember when I said number 4 would make Scaphism look like a bubble bath? I lied. This makes Scaphism look like a bubble bath. But somehow number 13 is worse. How is that even possible? Keep watching. 8. Molten metal execution. So remember when I said something in your kitchen? Yeah, we're talking about molten substances. Gold, silver, or lead, dealer's choice really. This method was popular among various cultures, but the Mongols had a special affinity for it. They'd melt precious metals and pour them down the victim's throat or into their eyes and ears. The logic: the crime of greed should be punished with the object of desire. Poetic? Sure. Absolutely horrifying? Absolutely. A chronicler from the Mongol conquests described a governor who'd been taxing people excessively. Genghis Khan's solution? Pour molten silver into his eyes and ears until his head literally burst from the pressure and heat. But here's the detail that got censored from most accounts. The smell. Burning human tissue mixed with heated metal creates an odor so distinctive and nauseating that witnesses would vomit. Some executioners had to rotate out because they couldn't handle it. The Roman Emperor Valerian allegedly suffered this fate at the hands of the Persian king Shapur I. Molten gold poured down his throat. Whether it's true or propaganda, the fact that multiple cultures independently came up with this idea tells you something dark about human nature. Speaking of human nature, number 14 reveals what happens when religion and torture intersect. And trust me, it's not pretty. 9. Immurement. Buried alive, two words that trigger primal fear in almost everyone. But this was burial with a twist. Immurement means being sealed into a wall, chamber, or confined space and left to die. Not quickly, mind you, you'd have just enough air to last days, sometimes weeks if the space was large enough. Mongolian leaders used this for religious offenses. They'd brick up monks or shamans who'd committed heresy. The screaming would echo through the walls for days until it didn't. Medieval Europe had its own version. They'd wall up people in castles or churches. Some immurement sites, when excavated centuries later, showed scratch marks on the inside of the walls. Victims had clawed at stone until their fingers were bloody stumps trying to escape. The most disturbing case? A monastery in Germany where they found the immured remains of a nun from the 1400s. She'd been pregnant, a capital sin for her order. The skeleton showed she'd been alive for at least a week after being sealed in. They found fingernail scratches 2 feet deep into the stone. Why was this erased? Because it was often done by religious institutions, and admitting that churches were sealing pregnant women into walls doesn't exactly help with the whole moral authority thing. But here's what'll really haunt you. Some victims were given just enough food and water to extend their suffering. Why? Well, number 10 explains the logic behind prolonged torture, and it's somehow worse than the torture itself. 10. The Judas cradle. Okay, so you know how I said number 7 was where things got really dark? I might have been premature. The Judas cradle was a pyramid-shaped seat, except you didn't sit on it so much as you were lowered onto it. Slowly, very slowly. The point would be inserted into, well, use your imagination. The victim would be suspended above it and gravity would do the rest. Sometimes they'd add weights to speed things up. Sometimes they'd leave you there for days, allowing the wound to fester. Spanish Inquisition records mention this device frequently, though most descriptions were later lost or destroyed. We know it existed because blacksmith receipts from the period list orders for punishment pyramids with specific dimensions. Here's the part that makes this especially cruel. They'd never clean it. Previous victims' blood and infections would be transferred to the next person, ensuring that even if you survived the initial trauma, sepsis would get you within days. One account from a French dungeon in the 1600s described a victim being lowered onto the cradle for just 10 minutes a day for a month. The psychological torture of knowing it was coming daily might have been worse than the physical pain. Why did this get erased? Because the Spanish Inquisition has enough bad PR without adding death by infected pyramid to their resume. Plus, explaining this device at a museum tour would be awkward. Still reading? Brave soul, or morbidly curious? Either way, number 15 is the grand finale, and it makes everything else look like a warm-up act. 11. Poenaculi, the punishment of the sack. Ancient Rome again, because apparently they had a punishment for everything. This one was specifically for patricide, killing your father. They'd sew you into a leather sack with a dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey. Yes, all alive. Then they'd throw the sack into the river. Now you're drowning, being bitten by a venomous snake, pecked by a panicking rooster, clawed by a terrified monkey, and mauled by a dog, all in pitch darkness, all while you can't move. But here's the detail Roman historians glossed over. Sometimes they'd weigh the sack down just enough that it wouldn't sink immediately. You'd bob in the water for minutes or even hours, giving the animals more time to panic and attack. Emperor Nero reportedly used this method on his own mother, Agrippina, Agrippina, though he tried other methods first, which says something about how bad this one was. Why was it erased? Because it's cartoonishly evil, like Saturday morning villain levels of cruel. Historians wanted to preserve Rome's image as a sophisticated civilization, and it's hard to do that when you're throwing people into rivers with angry farm animals. How are you holding up? Because we're about to talk about a punishment so bizarre that scholars argued for centuries about whether it even existed. Spoiler, it did. 12 Cement Shoes Ancient Edition. You've heard of the mafia's cement shoes, right? Well, ancient Persia did it first, except instead of cement, they used something that would slowly harden around your feet: mud, clay, and sometimes molten resin. They'd bury your feet in the substance and let it dry under the desert sun. As it hardened, it would contract, crushing your bones slowly. The process could take days and you'd be left standing the entire time. But here's the twist: they'd do this in the middle of the desert and leave you there. Dehydration, sunstroke, and the crushing pain would compete to see which would kill you first. Sometimes scavengers would start eating you before you died. Persian records describe this punishment for deserters and traitors, but most accounts were destroyed during Alexander the Great's conquest because they made the Persians look barbaric. Plot twist: Alexander kept using the method, he just didn't write about it. Archaeological evidence from desert regions occasionally turns up skeletal remains with crushed foot bones surrounded by hardened clay, confirming this wasn't just propaganda. Why erase it? Because it's hard to claim your civilization was advanced when you're essentially using the planet itself as a torture device. But hey, at least it was eco-friendly. 2 more to go. Can you handle it? Because number 14 involves a substance you literally drink every day. 13. The Barakanji wheel. Also called the Catherine wheel, this device turned execution into a spectator sport, and not the fun kind. You'd be tied to a large wooden wheel. Then the executioner would use an iron bar to break every single bone in your body, systematically, starting with your limbs and working inward. The goal wasn't to kill you quickly, it was to leave you as a broken, living pretzel. They'd then weave your shattered limbs through the spokes of the wheel and hoist it up on a pole for everyone to see. You could survive days like this. Birds would sometimes peck at you, weather would slowly finish what the executioner started. French records from the 1700s describe crowds of thousands gathering to watch breaking wheel executions. Some vendors would set up stalls nearby, selling food and drinks. It was a whole event. The last official breaking wheel execution was in Germany in 1841, but rumors suggest it continued unofficially in some regions into the early 1900s. Why was this erased? Because the Enlightenment was happening and Europe was trying to rebrand as civilized. Having watch a person be turned into a human pretzel as your main form of entertainment didn't fit the new image. One more, are you ready? Number 15 combines the worst elements of everything we've discussed into one nightmarish package. 14. Water torture, the ancient version. You've heard of waterboarding. This is waterboarding's great-grandfather, and he makes waterboarding look merciful. Ancient Chinese courts developed a method where they drip water onto a prisoner's forehead. 1 drop at a time for days, weeks, months. Sounds mild, right? Here's what happens. The constant dripping in the same spot actually begins to erode your skull. The psychological torture of hearing and feeling that drip becomes unbearable. Prisoners would go insane before the physical damage killed them. But some Chinese officials added a twist. They'd force-feed you water while simultaneously restricting your ability to urinate. Your bladder would swell until it ruptured internally. The pain was described as giving birth to demons. Dutch sailors in the 1600s documented seeing this method in Southeast Asia, but their journals were later lost by the Dutch East India Company because torture is bad for business. Why erase it? Because it's too simple. Anyone can drip water. The fact that something so basic can drive a person insane and physically harm them reveals how fragile humans really are. Empires don't like admitting their subjects are fragile. Ready for the finale? Take a breath. Number 15 is what happens when all previous punishments had a baby and that baby was raised by wolves. 15. Scavenger's daughter. We're ending where we began, with a device that crushed the human body but in the opposite way of the rack. Invented in the 1500s by Leonard Skevington, Lieutenant of the Tower of London. What a resume builder. This device compressed your body into a ball. It would force your knees to your chest, your head down, and your arms wrapped around. Then it would tighten and tighten and tighten. Your ribs would crack, your spine would compress. Blood would be forced from your nose and ears as pressure built up. Some victims' eyes would literally pop from their sockets. days. But here's the kicker, this device left fewer visible marks than other torture methods, making it easier to deny mistreatment. It was torture for the bureaucratic age. The scavenger's daughter was used during the English Reformation to torture religious dissidents. Many confessions from that period were obtained through its use, though this fact was conveniently omitted from official records. Why was it erased? Because England wanted to be seen as more civilized than Catholic Spain's Inquisition, despite using torture devices that were arguably worse. Marketing, baby. Outro. So there you have it, 15 punishments so brutal that historians collectively decided maybe we don't talk about these. If you made it through all 15 without tapping out, congratulations, you're either made of stern stuff or you should probably talk to someone about your viewing habits. Here's the thing that gets me, these weren't created by monsters, they were designed by regular people, governments, religious institutions, societies that also created art, music, and philosophy. What does that say about human nature? That we're capable of both creating the Sistine Chapel and the Brazen Bull, that's the real horror story, not what we did to each other, but that we're still capable of it. Sweet dreams, everybody. And hey, next time you think modern justice is harsh, remember, at least nobody's feeding you to rats or turning you into a human pretzel. I'm Mr. Basil, thanks for watching, and remember, history is dark, but ignorance is darker. Now if you'll excuse me, I need to go watch some kitten videos to cleanse my soul.